When a German Shepherd goes into labor, a retired vet steps in to help. But the moment the first puppy is born, she screams in terror. Because these puppies aren't just sick, they carry the scars of a dark, dangerous secret. This isn't just any stray dog. She's the victim of a ruthless man willing to do anything to get her back. How far will the vet go to protect this mother and her pups? And what horrifying truths will she uncover along the way? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The evening shadows stretched across Nora Blake's kitchen as she reached for her favorite ceramic mug. Steam rose from the kettle, carrying the soothing scent of chamomile through the air. The crickets outside provided a gentle backdrop to her nightly ritual, their steady chirping a reminder of why she'd chosen this quiet countryside life after leaving the military. Her fingers traced the rim of the mug as her gaze drifted to the photograph propped against the windowsill. In it, she stood proudly next to Max, her military canine partner, both of them dusty from a long day in the field. The image brought a familiar ache to her chest. Those days of patching up wounded service dogs in combat zones felt like another lifetime. A sudden pounding at her front door shattered the peaceful moment. Nora startled, nearly dropping her mug. The knocking grew more insistent. "Dr. Blake, please, I need help." The voice was high with panic. Nora opened the door to find Emily Miller, her usually reserved neighbor, trembling on the porch. Tears streaked her pale face. "It's Luna," Emily choked out. "She's having her puppies, but something's wrong. Please, you have to help." Nora hesitated. She'd promised herself no more emergency cases, no more life-and-death decisions. But Emily's desperate expression crumbled her resolve. "Let me get my kit," Nora said, already moving to the closet where she kept her old medical supplies. They hurried through the growing darkness to Emily's small house. Inside, Luna lay on a pile of blankets in the living room, her sides heaving with each labored breath. The German Shepherd's dark eyes were wide with pain and fear. Nora knelt beside the dog, running gentle hands over her distended belly. Luna whimpered, and Emily made a small, distressed sound in response. "How long has she been in labor?" Nora asked, slipping into the calm, professional tone she'd perfected during her service years. "About 4 hours," Emily whispered. "She started panting and pacing this afternoon." Nora nodded, continuing her examination. Luna's muscles tensed under her touch as another contraction hit. "Here we go," Nora murmured. "The first one's coming." Emily clutched her hands together as Luna pushed. Finally, the first puppy emerged, but instead of the expected joy, Nora felt her heart sink. The tiny body was covered in angry red lesions, its movements weak and irregular. "Oh, God!" Emily gasped. "What's wrong with it?" "Emily, I need you to focus," Nora said firmly, even as dread settled in her stomach. "Get me clean towels and put some water on to boil. Now." As Emily rushed to comply, Nora cradled the struggling newborn, her military training taking over. She kept her movements steady and sure, despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. Whatever was affecting this puppy, she had a sickening feeling it wouldn't be the last case she'd see tonight. The grandfather clock in Emily's living room struck midnight, its chime echoing through the tense atmosphere. Nora knelt beside Luna, her hands steady but her mind racing as she monitored the German Shepherd's progress. The room was dim, lit only by a table lamp that cast long shadows across the walls. The sharp smell of disinfectant mixed with the musty scent of wet fur. Emily sat cross-legged nearby, her fingers twisting together as she whispered quiet prayers. "Please let them be okay. Please let them be okay," she repeated like a mantra. 2 more puppies arrived within the hour, each bearing the same alarming lesions as the first. Nora's heart sank as she quickly moved them to separate clean areas she'd created, using old towels and cardboard boxes. "Luna's getting tired," Nora said, reaching for her medical kit. She pulled out an IV bag and carefully inserted the needle into Luna's leg. The dog barely flinched, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "This will help keep her strength up." Emily watched the procedure with tear-filled eyes. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Luna, she wasn't always mine. I found her about 6 months ago. Or rather, she found me." Emily's hands trembled as she spoke. She belonged to Victor Crane. Nora's hands stilled for a moment. Even in her short time in the community, she'd heard whispers about Victor Crane, a breeder whose reputation sent chills down people's spines. "He runs a breeding operation on the other side of the county," Emily continued, her voice shaking. "Luna showed up in my yard one night, terrified and half-starved. I couldn't send her back there." Luna whimpered as another contraction began. Nora turned her attention back to the dog, helping deliver yet another puppy with the same concerning symptoms. After the final puppy was born and stabilized, Nora stepped out onto Emily's front porch. The first hints of dawn were breaking across the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and brilliant orange. The cool morning air felt refreshing after the long, intense night. The screen door creaked, and Emily joined her, wiping fresh tears from her cheeks. "This is all my fault," she said, her voice cracking. "I should have done more to protect her. What if he finds out where she is? What if Dash—" "Hey," Nora cut in gently, turning to face her neighbor. "You did the right thing saving her. We'll figure out how to keep her safe." But even as she spoke those reassuring words, Victor Crane's name echoed in Nora's thoughts, like a shadow looming over the breaking dawn. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Nora's guest room as she carefully arranged blankets and heating pads for Luna and her puppies. The mother dog watched attentively from a plush bed, her eyes following Nora's every movement as she settled each whimpering puppy into the makeshift nursery. "There you go, sweet girl," Nora murmured, helping Luna settle beside her babies. The room filled with gentle snuffling sounds as Luna checked on each puppy, her maternal instincts strong despite her exhaustion. Nora set up her laptop on a small desk in the corner, keeping one eye on the new family while she began documenting symptoms. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she noted down every detail: the size and pattern of the lesions, the puppy's breathing rates, their weak cries. Each photo she took made her heart sink further. After an hour of research, Nora knew she needed expert help. She opened her video chat and clicked on a familiar name: Dr. Michael Grant, her former colleague from her military days. Michael's friendly face appeared on screen, his smile fading as Nora shared the photos and described the situation. "These lesions are concerning, Nora," he said, leaning closer to his screen. "The pattern suggests either severe nutritional deficiency or chemical exposure, maybe both." Nora took a deep breath. "The mother belonged to Victor Crane. Have you heard of him?" Michael's expression darkened instantly. "Victor Crane? He's been on our radar for years. There have been multiple investigations into his breeding operation, but nothing ever sticks. We've heard rumors about dogfighting rings, illegal breeding practices." He shook his head. "Be careful, Nora. That man has friends in dark places." The implications made Nora's stomach twist with anger. She glanced at Luna, peacefully nursing her puppies, and thought about what she must have endured. Her phone buzzed with Emily's incoming call. "Nora," Emily's voice quivered. "His truck. Victor's truck is here. He's driving around the neighborhood. I think he knows." "Stay inside," Nora said firmly. "Lock your doors. I've got Luna and the puppy safe here. He won't find them. After hanging up, Nora settled into her living room armchair. She spread her notes and files across the coffee table, creating a map of evidence. Michael's insights, her medical documentation, Emily's testimony. From the guest room, she could hear Luna's gentle movements as she tended to her puppies. Nora's jaw set with determination. She'd seen too much suffering in her military days to stand by and let it happen here. Whatever it took, she would protect Luna and her puppies from Victor Crane. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Nora's living room as she measured formula for the weakest puppy. Luna watched from her bed, her tail thumping softly against the blankets whenever Nora approached. Emily sat cross-legged nearby, folding clean towels and organizing supplies. "They're getting stronger," Emily said, reaching out to stroke Luna's head. The German Shepherd leaned into her touch, eyes half closed with contentment. Nora nodded, but her attention kept drifting to the window. Every passing car made her muscles tense. "They are, but they still need round-the-clock care." She glanced at her watch. Time for their medication. The routine of caring for the puppies filled the hours, but couldn't quite dispel the underlying anxiety. Emily had insisted on helping, though her hands trembled slightly as she worked. They both knew it was only a matter of time before Victor made his move. That time came sooner than expected. The sound of tires on gravel made them both freeze. Through the window, they saw a black pickup truck pull up to Emily's house next door. "Stay here," Nora ordered, already moving toward the door. "Lock it behind me." She reached Emily's front porch, just as Victor's meaty fist began pounding on the door. He towered over her, his face twisted with anger. "Where's my dog?" he demanded, taking a threatening step forward. His cologne couldn't mask the smell of cigarettes and something sharper, more chemical. Nora held her ground, drawing on years of military training to keep her voice steady. "Luna is under veterinary care. She and her puppies are in critical condition." "That dog is my property," Victor snarled. "Emily stole her from me. I've got papers to prove it." "The puppies were born with severe health issues," Nora countered. "As a licensed veterinarian, I've documented everything. Moving them now would endanger their lives." Victor's face darkened. He jabbed a finger toward her face. "You don't know who you're dealing with. I want my dog back, and those puppies are mine too." "Any judge will want to see my medical records," Nora said calmly. "Are you sure that's what you want?" Victor's eyes narrowed to slits. "This isn't over," he growled. "I'll be back, and you'll regret getting involved." He turned sharply, stomping back to his truck. Inside Emily's house, Nora found her neighbor huddled on the couch, shaking. "He's going to take them," Emily whispered. "He'll hurt them again." "No, he won't," Nora assured her, sitting down beside her. "We're going to fight this, legally, the right way." Later that night, after ensuring Emily was safely back at her house, Nora sat at her desk surrounded by legal documents and veterinary reports. Luna and her puppies slept peacefully in the next room while she searched through animal protection laws and cases of animal abuse. Her laptop screen glowed in the darkness as she compiled evidence, building their case piece by piece. The morning light streamed through Nora's kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the scattered papers covering her table. Her coffee sat untouched, growing cold as she clicked through news articles and police reports on her laptop. In the next room, the puppies stirred in their pen, their soft whimpers mixing with Luna's gentle breathing. "Another complaint filed," Nora muttered, jotting down notes. "Third county over, same pattern." Her eyes burned from hours of staring at the screen, but each new piece of information fueled her determination. The evidence painted a disturbing picture. Victor's name appeared in connection with multiple investigations, suspicious kennel fires, abandoned properties filled with injured dogs, and whispered accusations of dogfighting rings. Yet somehow, he always slipped away before charges could stick. Nora reached for her phone and dialed Dr. Michael Grant. He answered on the second ring. "Michael, I found something," she said, shuffling through her notes. "Victor's been operating across 3 counties, moving every time authorities get close." "I was afraid of that," Michael replied, his voice heavy. "We've tried building cases against him before. He's got friends in local government, pays off the right people, makes evidence disappear." "There has to be a way to stop him," Nora insisted, running a hand through her hair. "Be careful, Nora. Men like Victor don't take kindly to people digging into their business." The conversation left Nora both frustrated and more determined. She was still reviewing her notes when Emily arrived, carrying 2 bags of groceries. Her neighbor's hands trembled slightly as she set them on the counter. "I brought supplies," Emily said softly, glancing toward the window. "How are the puppies doing?" "Getting stronger every day," Nora replied, standing to help unpack. "Emily, I've been researching Victor. There are others out there. People he's hurt, animals he's abused. We need to find them." Emily's face paled. "You want to go up against him?" "Not alone," Nora explained, laying out her plan. "If we can get the community involved, find others willing to speak up. Victor's power comes from people being too scared to stand together." Emily twisted her hands together, but there was a glimmer of resolve in her eyes. "I know some people at the local shelter. They might know something." "That's perfect," Nora encouraged. "We just need to be discreet about it." As evening approached, Emily headed home with a promise to make careful inquiries. Nora moved through her house, checking each lock twice. The sound of Victor's truck still echoed in her memory, but she refused to let fear paralyze her. Luna watched from her bed as Nora secured the last window, her loyal eyes following every move. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Nora and Emily approached the local animal shelter. The brick building hummed with life, dogs barking, cats meowing, and volunteers bustling about with food bowls and cleaning supplies. Inside, the walls told stories of hope through dozens of happy adoption photos, showing smiling families with their new pets. "It's different here," Emily whispered, her eyes taking in the cheerful atmosphere. "So different from where Luna came from." Lisa Martinez, the shelter director, met them in her small office. She was a petite woman with kind eyes and laugh lines, though her expression turned serious as Nora explained their situation. "Victor Crane," Lisa said, shaking her head. "We've had several dogs come through here that we suspected were from his operations. The injuries, the trauma responses, but proving it has been nearly impossible." She pulled out a thick folder from her filing cabinet. "Document everything. Photos, vet records, daily observations. Even small details matter. And you'll want to talk to Jake Turner in animal control. He's been trying to build cases against operations like Victor's for years." Later that afternoon, they met Jake at a local coffee shop. He was younger than Nora expected, with earnest eyes and a determined set to his jaw. He listened intently as they shared Luna's story and the puppy's condition. "Victor's got friends in high places," Jake explained, his coffee cooling untouched. "Mayor's office, county commissioner, they all seem to look the other way when his name comes up. But if we can get solid evidence—" He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Medical records, photographs, witness statements. Everything needs to be absolutely bulletproof." "We can do that," Nora assured him, her military training kicking in. "I've been keeping detailed records since the night the puppies were born." "I'll help too," Emily added quietly but firmly. "I know what I saw at his property." Jake nodded, pulling out his business card. "I'll start looking into his current operations. But be careful. Victor doesn't like people asking questions." When Nora returned home, Luna greeted her at the door with a wagging tail and gentle whine. In the makeshift nursery, the puppies squirmed and squeaked, their tiny paws reaching for their mother. Despite their rough start, they were growing stronger each day. Watching them, Nora felt the weight of responsibility settle more firmly on her shoulders. These innocent creatures trusted her completely. She pulled out her notebook and began organizing their documentation, determined to build a case that even Victor's connections couldn't dismiss. The rain drummed steadily against Nora's kitchen window as she checked her old military-grade camera, making sure the weatherproofing was still intact. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory from countless missions guiding her movements. On the kitchen table lay her waterproof notebook, ready to document everything they might find. Emily arrived, shaking water from her umbrella. "The puppies are getting so active now," she said, heading straight to the makeshift nursery where Luna and her litter stayed. "I'll keep them comfortable while you're gone." Nora nodded, grateful for Emily's help. "Remember, if anything seems off, call me immediately." She packed the camera and notebook into her backpack, along with extra batteries and memory cards. An hour later, Nora crouched beside Jake in the wet underbrush, half a mile from Victor's property. The rain provided good cover, muffling their movements and reducing visibility. Through her binoculars, Nora's stomach turned at what she saw. Dogs chained in the mud, their ribs showing through matted fur. Strange equipment that looked like training apparatus for fighting scattered across the yard. "There," Jake whispered, pointing to a structure partially hidden behind the main building. "That's the kennel area they don't want anyone to see. Notice how it's just out of view from the main road?" Nora lifted her camera, its familiar weight steadying her hands despite the adrenaline pumping through her veins. The zoom lens captured clear images of the deplorable conditions. She documented everything: the chains, the suspicious equipment, the hidden kennel. "Watch the tree line," Jake murmured, scanning the property. "Victor's got 2 armed guards who patrol every 20 minutes. They're due back this way soon." Nora's finger pressed the shutter button repeatedly, each click accompanied by the soft whir of the camera's mechanisms. She captured images of men carrying suspicious packages between buildings, dogs being roughly handled, and the overall layout of the property. That evening, Nora sat at her dining room table, spreading the photos out in neat rows. The images told a horrifying story of neglect and cruelty. Emily leaned over her shoulder, gasping softly at each new revelation. "Nora," Emily's voice quavered, "are we in over our heads? These people look dangerous." Nora paused in her organizing to squeeze Emily's hand. "We're doing the right thing. With these photos and Jake's help, we can build a case that not even Victor's connections can ignore." But as she returned to arranging the evidence, the weight of Victor's influence and the danger he posed felt as heavy as the storm clouds still hanging outside. The evening settled quietly around Nora's house, broken only by the soft whimpers of Luna's puppies in their pen. She sat at her desk, reviewing the day's photographs when a distinct crunch of gravel caught her attention. Her body tensed, years of military training kicking in as she moved silently to the window. Through a gap in the curtains, she spotted a dark figure moving near her garden. The shape was too large to be a deer or local wildlife. Nora's pulse quickened as she grabbed her heavy-duty flashlight from the kitchen drawer, the same one she'd carried during night missions overseas. Taking a deep breath, she slipped on her boots and eased open her back door. The cool night air carried the scent of crushed flowers and disturbed earth. Nora moved cautiously, keeping to the shadows as she approached her garden. When she reached the flower beds, her heart sank. Her carefully tended garden lay in ruins. Deep boot prints had crushed her prized dahlias and marigolds, leaving ugly gashes in the soft soil. Someone had deliberately trampled through the rows, destroying months of work. A flutter of white caught her eye, a piece of paper pinned to her shed door. Nora approached carefully, scanning the area before reading the crude message. "Stay out of my business." The threatening words were scrawled in harsh black marker. With slightly trembling hands, she pulled out her phone and called Jake. He answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the late hour. Within 15 minutes, his car pulled into her driveway, lights off. "This is escalating faster than I expected," Jake said, photographing the boot prints and collecting the note in an evidence bag. His face was grim in the beam of his flashlight. "Victor's getting nervous. He knows we're building a case." "What's our next step?" Nora asked, watching as Jake documented the garden damage. "I'll push this up the chain first thing tomorrow," he replied, carefully bagging the note. "But Nora, you need to be extra careful. Victor's showing he's willing to get physical." After Jake left, Nora moved through her house with military precision. She checked every lock twice, tested each window, and secured all entry points. Her old training surfaced as she placed makeshift alarms. Empty cans strung together near vulnerable windows. A chair wedged under the back door handle. Luna padded after her as she worked, the German Shepherd's presence both comforting and protective. When Nora finally settled into bed, Luna lay beside it, her ears perked and alert to every sound. In the darkness, Nora listened to the gentle breathing of Luna and her puppies, her jaw set with determination as she silently promised to protect them, no matter what it took. The threats only strengthened her resolve to see this through. The morning sunlight streamed through Nora's living room window, casting long shadows across the scattered papers on her coffee table. She methodically sorted through photographs and documents, creating organized piles of evidence. Her hands paused over a particularly disturbing image of one of Luna's puppies, their tiny body marked with lesions. The gentle knock at her door announced Emily's arrival. She entered carrying a large thermos of coffee, her eyes brighter than usual despite the dark circles underneath them. "I've been talking to people," Emily said, pouring them each a cup. "Quietly, like we discussed. Mrs. Henderson from the grocery store, Tom at the hardware store. They're willing to come to the meeting. And there are others." Nora smiled gratefully, taking a sip of the hot coffee. "Every voice counts. How are you holding up?" "Better," Emily replied, sitting down beside her. "Knowing we're not alone in this helps." Later that afternoon, they gathered at the town hall. The small meeting room filled quickly with concerned faces, some familiar, others new. Nora watched as Emily shared Luna's story, her voice growing stronger with each word. When Nora presented the evidence, gas echoed through the room. Photos of Victor's property and documentation of Luna's puppy's conditions drew shocked expressions. Lisa, the shelter director, stood up first, her face set with determination. "This has gone on long enough," Lisa declared. "The shelter will support your efforts completely." A woman with kind eyes and auburn hair raised her hand. "I'm Rachel, a former vet tech. I've seen cases like this before, and I want to help. I can testify about the puppy's conditions." However, not everyone shared their courage. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact. One man spoke up, his voice trembling slightly. "Victor has friends in the county office. He's gotten people fired before." Despite the fear, a small group stayed behind after the meeting, gathering around Nora and Emily to offer their support. Rachel immediately began discussing medical documentation strategies, while Lisa proposed ways to protect other animals in the community. Back at Nora's house, Emily sat on the floor beside Luna, who pressed her nose against Emily's cheek in a gentle gesture of affection. The German Shepherd's tail wagged softly as Emily scratched behind her ears. "I never thought so many people would help," Emily said, watching as Luna settled contentedly beside her. Nora nodded, spreading her materials across the dining room table. She began organizing the new statements and contact information they'd gathered, preparing everything for Jake. Each piece of evidence, each supporter's testimony, brought them one step closer to stopping Victor. Nora sat across from Jake in his cramped office at the Animal Control Department, spreading out folders of evidence across his desk. Sunlight filtered through dusty blinds, casting strips of light across the photographs of injured dogs, detailed medical records, and handwritten witness statements. "This is impressive work, Nora," Jake said, carefully examining a particularly disturbing photo of chained dogs at Victor's property. His brow furrowed as he sorted through the documents with methodical precision. The medical documentation on Luna's puppies alone shows clear signs of negligence and abuse. Nora watched as Jake reviewed her carefully organized notes, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I've included statements from 3 former employees who witnessed the dogfighting operations firsthand," she explained, pointing to a blue folder. "They're willing to testify." Jake nodded, his expression serious as he pulled out his legal pad. "Here's what we need to do," he began, drawing a quick outline. "First, we'll present this evidence to a judge for a search warrant. The photographs of the property are particularly crucial. They show probable cause." He leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly. "But we have to be extremely careful about how we proceed. Victor's gotten away before because of procedural errors. Every piece of evidence we collect during the raid needs to be properly documented and handled." "What's our timeline looking like?" Nora asked, her military training kicking in as she mentally prepared for the operation. "Once we secure the warrant, we'll coordinate with local law enforcement," Jake explained, sketching out a rough timeline. "We'll need veterinary support on standby for the animals we find. The key is to move quickly once everything's in place. We can't risk Victor getting wind of this and destroying evidence." Nora left Jake's office an hour later, her mind racing with everything they'd discussed. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders as she drove home, going over Jake's warnings about the importance of proper procedure. In her garage, she began organizing medical supplies, sterile bandages, antibiotics, and emergency equipment. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory from her military days taking over as she packed trauma kits. Each supply she checked off her list brought them one step closer to bringing Victor to justice. Luna's soft whine from the doorway drew her attention. The German shepherd's gentle eyes seemed to understand the gravity of what was coming. Nora paused in her preparations to scratch behind Luna's ears, drawing strength from the dog's quiet presence. "We're going to help them all," she whispered, her voice firm with conviction, despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. She returned to her task, methodically organizing supplies while mentally reviewing Jake's instructions about evidence collection and proper documentation. The overcast morning cast a gray pallor over Nora's living room as volunteers gathered in a tight circle, their determination evident in their focused expressions and attentive postures. Jake stood at the center, his expression serious and shoulders squared as he outlined their plan on a whiteboard, drawing clear lines and marking critical points. 6 determined faces looked back at him, a mix of shelter workers, animal advocates, and community members who'd stepped forward to help, each bringing their own expertise and commitment to the cause. "Remember," Jake emphasized, tapping the board with his marker, his voice carrying the weight of experience, "safety comes first. No one enters the property until law enforcement secures the scene." He gestured to the detailed diagram showing entry points and potential locations of dogs, carefully explaining each marked area. Nora stepped forward, her voice steady and authoritative as she addressed the group, drawing from years of military experience. "These dogs will likely be terrified and possibly aggressive from trauma." She demonstrated proper approaching techniques, keeping her movements slow and deliberate, her body angled slightly away from an imaginary dog. "Always stay in sight of your partner and never corner an animal. Let them come to you when possible. Watch their body language for signs of stress. The afternoon sun struggled to break through the thick clouds as the team transformed Nora's garage into a well-organized supply station. Emily moved with quiet efficiency, her newfound confidence showing in every motion as she labeled crates and stacked them near the door. Her hands no longer trembled as she worked, her movements precise and purposeful, a far cry from the hesitant woman she'd been just weeks ago. Rachel knelt beside a large crate, demonstrating calming techniques to two other volunteers who watched intently. "Speak softly," she instructed, her voice gentle and even, creating a soothing atmosphere, even in practice. "Keep your body language relaxed. These dogs will pick up on any tension you're carrying." She showed them how to approach fearful dogs from the side, never making direct eye contact, her movements fluid and natural from years of experience. Nora watched as her team prepared, pride swelling in her chest at their dedication and attention to detail. Medical supplies were carefully organized in waterproof containers, each one clearly marked and easily accessible. Food and water bowls were stacked and ready, with extra supplies packed as backup. Emergency first aid kits were double-checked and positioned near each transport vehicle, their contents verified against a detailed checklist. As darkness settled over the property like a heavy blanket, Nora made her final rounds. She checked each piece of equipment methodically, testing flashlights, inspecting catch poles for wear, examining leather gloves for damage, and arranging muzzles of various sizes. Everything had its place, ready for tomorrow's operation, a testament to her military precision. In the quiet of her home, Nora found herself drawn to the guest room where Luna rested, the soft light from the hallway spilling across the threshold. The German Shepherd's puppies snuggled against her belly, their tiny bodies rising and falling with peaceful breaths, unaware of the operation being planned on their behalf. Luna's tail thumped softly against the bed as Nora approached, a gentle greeting between friends. Settling beside them on the plush bedding, Nora ran her fingers through Luna's soft fur, finding comfort in the simple connection. "We'll make this right," she whispered, her voice barely audible, in the stillness of the room, the promise hanging in the air like a prayer. The first light of dawn painted the sky in muted grays as police vehicles silently took their positions around Victor's property. Nora sat in her truck with Emily and Rachel, watching officers in tactical gear move like shadows through the morning mist. The crunch of boots on gravel and the occasional static burst from police radios broke the tense silence. Jake stood with the police commander, pointing at a detailed map of the property. Nora's team of volunteers waited in their vehicles, medical kits and transport crates ready. Her hands tightened around her old field kit, muscle memory from her military days kicking in. The raid began with swift precision. Police breached the front gates, their commands echoing across the property. Two of Victor's guards emerged, raising their hands after a brief standoff. Shouts and the sound of doors being forced open carried across the morning air. Nora held her breath, counting the seconds until Jake's signal. When it finally came, 3 quick flashes from his flashlight, she led her team onto the property. The sight that greeted them made her stomach churn. Dogs were everywhere, many crammed into rusted cages barely big enough to turn around in. Others were chained to metal posts, their necks raw from heavy collars. The stench of waste and disease hung thick in the air. Most of the animals cowered at their approach, while others bared their teeth, fear making them defensive. "Rachel, start with the medical cases," Nora directed, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She documented everything with her camera, the filthy conditions, the empty water bowls, the wounds on the dogs' bodies. Each click of the shutter felt like building another brick in the wall that would keep Victor locked away. Emily worked alongside her gentle voice soothing frightened dogs as she helped load them into crates. The animals' ribs showed through their dull coats, testament to long-term neglect. A commotion from the main house drew their attention. Victor emerged in handcuffs, his face contorted with rage, as two officers led him toward a waiting police car. "You'll regret this," he shouted, struggling against his restraints. "All of you!" His eyes found Nora's across the yard. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away. In that moment, she saw not a powerful man, but a coward whose reign of cruelty was finally ending. The morning wore on as they worked to evacuate the dogs. Each animal was photographed, examined, and carefully loaded into transport vehicles. Nora moved from case to case, providing emergency treatment where needed, her military training helping her prioritize the most critical cases. The rising sun cast long shadows across the warehouse parking lot as Nora's convoy of vehicles pulled up to the temporary shelter. Dogs barked and whimpered from their crates, their voices echoing off the metal walls like a chorus of pain and fear. Local volunteers had already set up stations with fresh water, food, and medical supplies, their faces determined despite the early hour. "Let's get them inside," Nora called out, opening the back of her truck with practiced efficiency. "Remember what we practiced: slow movements, gentle voices. We don't want to frighten them any more than they already are." The warehouse space had been divided into sections with temporary fencing, creating a maze of safe spaces. Fresh blankets lined clean crates, and heating lamps provided warmth in the chilly morning air, casting a soft glow throughout the space. One by one, they carefully moved the rescued dogs inside, each transfer a delicate operation. Nora quickly organized the triage area, her military efficiency showing through as she directed volunteers with clear, precise instructions. "Rachel, start IVs on the dehydrated ones. Check their gums and skin elasticity first. Emily, make sure every dog has fresh water and food. Small portions for now. We don't want to overwhelm their systems." She worked methodically, examining each dog and documenting their conditions in her notebook. Many flinched at her touch, their bodies telling stories of long-term abuse that made her heart ache. She cleaned infected wounds with gentle hands, administered medications with careful precision, and spoke softly to each animal, promising them better days ahead. "This one's severely malnourished," Rachel reported, gesturing to a trembling German shepherd whose ribs showed prominently through its dull coat. "Starting fluids now. Poor thing can barely stand." Emily moved quietly between the crates, offering gentle words of comfort as she distributed food and water. Some dogs lunged at the bowls with desperate hunger, while others cowered in corners, too scared to approach. She took extra time with the fearful ones, sitting nearby and speaking in soothing tones until they felt safe enough to drink, her patience unwavering. Hours passed as they worked without rest. The initial chaos slowly gave way to order as each dog received medical attention and settled into their temporary homes. The warehouse filled with the soft sounds of sleeping dogs and the occasional whimper, a symphony of healing beginning to replace the earlier sounds of distress. As night fell, Nora sat cross-legged beside a scarred pit bull's crate. The dog's body bore evidence of fighting, with old wounds marking its face and chest, but its eyes held a gentle spirit that touched her soul. She reached through the crate's door, letting the dog sniff her hand before gently stroking its head, feeling the rough texture of healed scars beneath her fingers. "You're safe now," she whispered, watching as the dog's eyes grew heavy with sleep. Around her, the warehouse had grown quiet, except for the soft hum of heating lamps. Most of the dogs were resting, some peacefully, for what might have been the first time in their lives, their chests rising and falling in steady rhythms. Exhaustion weighed heavy on her shoulders, but hope burned brighter than her fatigue. Each sleeping dog represented a life saved, a chance at healing and finding love in a forever home. She continued petting the pit bull, its steady breathing a reminder of why they had fought so hard to make this day happen. And why. Nora sat at her kitchen table, a steaming mug of coffee warming her hands as she watched the morning news. The raid dominated the local coverage, with footage showing police cars surrounding Victor's property and officers leading him away in handcuffs. Sources say the operation uncovered dozens of abused animals, the reporter announced, standing in front of the warehouse-turned-shelter. Behind her, volunteers could be seen moving carefully between rows of crates. Local veterinarian Nora Blake and animal control officer Jake Turner spearheaded the investigation that led to this breakthrough. The screen showed images of the rescued dogs, their conditions telling a story of neglect and cruelty. Nora's throat tightened as legal experts discussed the evidence and potential charges Victor faced. Her phone rang, Jake's name lighting up the screen. "Morning, Nora," he said, his voice carrying a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. "Victor's arraignment is set for next Tuesday. With the evidence we gathered and the condition of those dogs, we've got a solid case for conviction." Nora nodded, relief washing over her. "That's good news. But listen," Jake's tone grew serious. "Keep your guard up. Victor's got friends in dark places. They might try to cause trouble." As if on cue, Emily arrived with Luna and her puppies for their checkup. The sight of them brought a smile to Nora's face. Luna's coat now gleamed with health, and her puppies wiggled with energy, their earlier lesions healing well. "They're getting so strong," Emily said, watching the puppies tumble over each other. Luna lay contentedly nearby, her eyes following her playful offspring. It's hard to believe how sick they were that first night. Later that evening, after Emily and the dogs had gone home, Nora noticed an envelope that had been slipped under her door. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, pulling out a single sheet of paper. The message was brief but menacing. "You should have minded your own business. This isn't over." Fear flickered in her chest as she read the words again. The threat was clear, though unsigned. Nora took a deep breath, steadying herself. She wouldn't let them intimidate her, not after coming this far. With determined movements, she walked to her desk and locked the letter in the bottom drawer. It would join their growing file of evidence, but it wouldn't stop their mission. Through her window, she could see the last rays of sunlight painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The peaceful scene stood in stark contrast to the threat in her drawer, but it reminded her of why she'd chosen this fight. Every animal deserved a chance at that kind of peace. The temporary shelter hummed with the sounds of hope and healing. Volunteers moved purposefully between kennels, their arms full of donated blankets, food bags, and medical supplies. Nora stood at the entrance, overwhelmed by the sight of cars pulling up outside, their trunks packed with donations from the community. "We've got another load of dog food," called Rachel, directing a group of teenagers who eagerly formed a chain to unload the supplies. And Mrs. Henderson from the craft store brought more beds and towels. The outpouring of support had been constant since the news broke. Local businesses sent cleaning supplies, pet stores donated crates and food, and the town's residents kept arriving with whatever they could spare. A corkboard near the entrance was filled with adoption applications, each one representing hope for a rescued dog's future. As the afternoon settled into a steady rhythm, Nora made her rounds. She knew each dog's story now, carried their pain and progress in her heart. In the quiet corner of the warehouse, she paused at a kennel housing a shepherd mix named Bear. His brown eyes watched her cautiously from the back of his enclosure. "Hey there, sweet boy," she said softly, kneeling beside his kennel. Bear's ears twitched at her voice, but he remained still. A loud crash from across the room made him flinch and retreat further into his corner. Nora stayed perfectly still, keeping her voice gentle and steady. "It's okay. You're safe now," she murmured. Slowly, she extended her hand through the kennel bars, palm up. Minutes passed, and finally, Bear inched forward, his nose twitching as he sniffed her hand. When his cold nose touched her palm, Nora felt tears prick her eyes. Inspired by Bear's small step toward trust, Nora gathered the volunteers for an impromptu training session. "These dogs have never known kindness," she explained, demonstrating proper approach techniques. "Every movement we make, every word we speak, is a chance to show them that humans can be gentle." The volunteers listened intently, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. Nora showed them how to read dog body language, how to offer treats without seeming threatening, and how to remain calm when the animals showed fear or aggression. As the day drew to a close, Nora gathered her things, her muscles aching from hours of work. When she stepped outside, she stopped short at the sight before her. A small group of children stood on the sidewalk, holding handmade signs decorated with colorful paw prints. "Thank you for saving the dogs," the signs proclaimed in wobbly letters. One little girl stepped forward, her sign almost bigger than she was. "My mommy says you're a hero," she said shyly. "Like a superhero for dogs." Nora felt tears well up in her eyes as she looked at their earnest faces, their pure and simple gratitude touching something deep in her heart. These children understood what really mattered, not the legal battles or threatening letters, but the simple act of helping those who couldn't help themselves. The morning sun streamed through the cafe windows as Nora settled into a corner booth with Jake, Emily, and Rachel. The smell of coffee and fresh-baked muffins filled the air as they spread papers across the table. Luna's puppies, now growing stronger each day, rested in a carrier at Emily's feet. "The evidence is solid," Jake said, tapping a thick folder. "We've uncovered connections to illegal gambling and animal abuse rings in 3 counties. The prosecutors adding more charges." Rachel leaned forward, her veterinary experience showing in her precise questions about the rescued dog's recovery. "We're making progress with their health issues, but the temporary shelter isn't sustainable long-term." Nora nodded, watching the steam rise from her coffee cup. The past few weeks had shown her something remarkable, a community willing to stand up and help. An idea that had been forming in her mind suddenly felt right. "What if we made it permanent?" she asked, looking around the table. "Not just a temporary shelter, but a real sanctuary." Emily's eyes widened. She twisted her napkin in her hands, but there was a spark of interest in her expression. "You mean, create a safe place? For all of them?" "For any animal that needs it," Nora explained, her voice growing stronger. "We've got the community support, the medical expertise with Rachel, and—" she gestured at Jake, "the legal knowledge to do it right." Jake rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I can help navigate the permits and zoning requirements. My cousin works in real estate. She might know about available properties." Rachel's face lit up. "I could set up a proper medical facility, maybe even train volunteers in basic animal care." She pulled out her phone, already making notes. Emily, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. "My grandmother's old farm." She blushed as everyone turned to look at her. "It's been empty for years. 20 acres just outside town. It even has some old stable buildings." The energy around the table shifted, excitement building as they began to see the possibilities. Rachel sketched rough layouts on napkins while Jake made calls about property regulations. Emily's initial hesitation transformed into eager participation as she described the farm's potential. "We could section off areas for different needs," she suggested, growing more animated. "Quiet spaces for traumatized dogs, play yards for the social ones. Nora watched her friend's enthusiasm with a warm feeling in her chest. This was more than just a reaction to Victor's cruelty. It was a chance to create something lasting and good. As the meeting wound down, Nora gathered her notes, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. She helped Emily load Luna and the puppies into her car, their little tails wagging as they settled into their carrier. Behind the wheel, Nora glanced at her passengers. Luna's gentle eyes met hers, and one of the puppies let out a tiny yawn. These were the first lives they'd saved, but now she knew they wouldn't be the last. The morning air was crisp and clean as Nora stood in the middle of the overgrown field, tall grass brushing against her legs. Wildflowers dotted the landscape with splashes of purple and yellow, and an old barn stood sentinel against the brightening sky. The 10 acres stretched out before her, full of possibility. Emily and Jake made their way through the grass to join her, their footsteps crushing dew-covered stems. Emily clutched a notebook to her chest, while Jake held a stack of municipal papers. "It's perfect," Nora said, turning in a slow circle. "Look at all this space." Jake nodded, consulting his documents. "The zoning is already agricultural. That'll make permits easier to obtain." Emily opened her notebook and began sketching. Nora walked a few paces, her mind transforming the empty space into something meaningful. "We could put the quarantine area here, away from the main buildings," she said, gesturing to a secluded corner of the property. "The rehabilitation spaces could go near the barn, and we'll need plenty of room for play areas." "The barn could be converted into a medical facility," Jake suggested, making notes. "With some renovation, it would be perfect for Rachel's veterinary setup." Emily looked up from her sketching. "What about a visitor center?" "Right here, near the entrance." She pointed to a flat area near the road. "It would make it easier for potential adopters to find us." As they walked the property discussing possibilities, a couple approached from the neighboring house. The woman waved warmly. "We heard you might be starting an animal sanctuary," she called out. "My husband and I would love to volunteer. We've got experience with farm animals." Nora smiled, touched by the immediate show of support. They spent several minutes talking with the neighbors, who offered valuable insights about the property's history and the area's weather patterns. Back at home that evening, Nora sat at her desk, surrounded by papers and spreadsheets. Luna dozed contentedly at her feet while the puppies tumbled over each other in their play area. The sound of their happy yips provided a gentle soundtrack as she worked on the sanctuary proposal. She carefully detailed the startup costs, from building renovations to medical equipment. Her military training helped her create precise operational plans, including staffing needs and daily routines. Each section of the proposal felt like another piece of the dream taking shape. Looking down at Luna, Nora felt her heart swell. The sanctuary would be more than just a shelter. It would be a place of healing and hope for animals who had nowhere else to go. She turned back to her work, adding details about volunteer training programs and community outreach initiatives. The puppies' playful barks echoed through the room as she continued writing, their joy a reminder of why this mission mattered so much. The construction site buzzed with energy as volunteers arrived at dawn, their trucks loaded with tools and building supplies. The morning sun cast long shadows across the field as people unloaded wheelbarrows, lumber, and fencing materials. The old barn's doors creaked open, welcoming the transformation that awaited. A cool breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut wood and damp earth, invigorating everyone's spirits. "Let's start with the perimeter fence," Jake called out, directing a team toward the property line. His clipboard held detailed plans, and he moved between groups, ensuring everyone understood their tasks and safety protocols. His calm voice and clear instructions helped settle the nervous energy of first-time volunteers. Nora threw herself into the physical work, grateful for her military training as she helped carry heavy posts and stretch wire fencing. Her hands grew rough and blistered from hammering, but each completed section filled her with satisfaction. The steady rhythm of construction sounds, hammering, sawing, and the whir of power tools created a symphony of progress. She paused occasionally to wipe sweat from her brow, her muscles aching in a way that reminded her of basic training. Emily had set up a command center under a pop-up tent surrounded by clipboards and supply lists. She coordinated deliveries, directed volunteers to where they were needed most, and ensured everyone had water and snacks. Her quiet efficiency kept the project running smoothly, transforming her usual shyness into focused purpose. She surprised herself with how naturally she took charge, her voice growing stronger with each passing hour. Inside the barn, Rachel supervised the installation of medical equipment. The musty space gradually transformed into a sterile environment with proper lighting and examination tables. Volunteers scrubbed walls, installed cabinets, and organized supplies with careful precision. The smell of cleaning products replaced years of dust and hay, marking the beginning of a new chapter for the old structure. As afternoon approached, the property began to take shape. Kennels stood in neat rows, their fresh lumber gleaming in the sun. The rehabilitation area boasted secure fencing and shade structures, while the quarantine section maintained its necessary distance from the main facilities. Every nail and board represented another step toward their shared dream. When the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Emily called everyone together for a well-deserved break. Blankets spread across the grass, and coolers opened to reveal a potluck feast. The volunteers gathered in groups, their faces tired but satisfied, sharing sandwiches and stories of the day's accomplishments. Children of volunteers played tag between the newly built structures, their laughter a promise of the joy this place would bring. Nora sat with her back against a newly installed fence post, taking in the scene before her. Jake lounged nearby, his usual professional demeanor relaxed as he joked with the construction crew. Emily distributed homemade cookies, finally at ease among the group that had become like family. Her smile grew wider with each person she served. The sound of laughter floated across the property, mixing with the evening birdsong. Nora felt something shift inside her, a lightening of the burden she'd carried since her military days. Here, surrounded by people who shared her vision, the memories of lives she couldn't save began to soften, replaced by the promise of lives she could help save now. The sanctuary wasn't just taking physical shape. It was building a community, healing hearts, and creating hope, one board at a time. The autumn breeze rustled through the newly planted trees as Nora walked the sanctuary grounds, clipboard in hand. The transformation was remarkable. What had once been an empty field now housed state-of-the-art kennels, play areas, and a welcoming visitor center. She checked items off her list while Emily trailed behind her, phone pressed to her ear as she confirmed details with local reporters. "Yes, the ribbon-cutting ceremony will be at 10, Emily said, her voice carrying a confidence that would have been unthinkable months ago. "And yes, we'll have rescue success stories to share." Rachel darted between buildings, putting final touches on the adoption event displays. Photographs of available dogs lined the walls, each accompanied by a heartwarming biography. She'd arranged the meet and greet areas thoughtfully, creating calm spaces where potential adopters could connect with their future companions. Jake tested the security system one final time, showing volunteers how to operate the cameras and emergency protocols. His usual serious expression softened as he watched the dogs playing in their new enclosures, safe and content. "Everything's secure," he assured Nora. "We're ready for whatever comes our way." As the afternoon sun began to fade, a local carpenter's truck pulled into the driveway. The elderly man carefully unloaded his creation, a beautifully carved wooden sign. The letters Luna's Refuge were carved in flowing script, with delicate paw prints bordering the edges. Nora's hand flew to her mouth as emotion overwhelmed her. "It's perfect," she whispered, running her fingers over the smooth wood. The carpenter smiled and refused payment, saying only that he was honored to contribute to such a worthy cause. In her office, Nora spent hours crafting her opening speech. Words flowed onto the page as she recalled Luna's rescue, the frightened puppies, and the community that had rallied around them. She wanted to capture both the darkness they'd faced and the light they'd found in working together. As evening settled over the sanctuary, Nora built a fire in the small pit outside her office. Luna curled up beside her, gray now touching her muzzle, but her eyes still bright and trusting. The flames cast dancing shadows as Nora pulled out a fresh notebook and began to write. Dear future self, today marks the beginning of a new chapter. Remember the fear in Luna's eyes when we first met her? Remember the helplessness we felt facing Victor's cruelty? Those moments led us here, to this sanctuary built with love and determination. I promise to never turn away from an animal in need. I promise to keep fighting, no matter how difficult the battle becomes. Each life we save helps heal the wounds of those we couldn't save before. This sanctuary isn't just about rescuing animals. It's about building a community of hope. Emily found her voice here. Jake rediscovered his faith in justice. Rachel found her purpose again. And I finally found my way home. Luna rested her head on Nora's lap as she wrote, offering silent comfort as she had so many times before. The stars emerged overhead, witnesses to a promise made in firelight, a promise to stand strong for those who needed protection, to be a voice for the voiceless, to never stop fighting for what was right. The morning sun painted the sanctuary in golden light as cars filled the newly graveled parking lot. Colorful balloons swayed in the gentle breeze, their ribbons dancing along the fence line. Families streamed through the entrance, children pointing excitedly at the educational booths that lined the pathway. Local news crews set up their equipment, while volunteers in bright blue shirts guided visitors to various stations. At the Welcome Center, Rachel arranged adoption portfolios while explaining the sanctuary's mission to interested families. Each dog here has a story, she said, gesturing to the photo wall. And we're here to help write their happy endings. Emily moved through the crowd with practiced ease, directing people to refreshments and answering questions. Her voice carried clearly now, no trace of her former shyness as she explained the sanctuary's programs to a group of potential donors. Jake stood near the security office, carefully monitoring the flow of visitors while keeping a watchful eye on the dog areas. He gave Nora a reassuring nod as she approached the podium set up near the main building. The crowd gathered, and Nora cleared her throat. "Welcome to Luna's Refuge," she began, her voice steady and warm. "This sanctuary started with one dog, a scared German shepherd named Luna." She gestured to Luna, who sat calmly beside Emily. "She taught us that every animal deserves a chance at happiness, at safety, at love." As Nora shared the story of Luna's rescue and the community's fight against cruelty, many eyes grew misty. She spoke of Victor's arrest, of the raids that saved dozens of dogs, and of the countless volunteers who had turned an empty field into a haven of hope. Applause thundered through the crowd as Nora finished speaking. Children rushed to the meet and greet areas where carefully selected dogs waited to make new friends. Bear, the once timid shepherd mix, wagged his tail as a quiet teenage girl knelt beside him. Their connection was immediate and profound. By afternoon, adoption papers were being processed. Throughout the day, more matches were made. a retired couple fell in love with a senior golden retriever. A young family connected with an energetic lab mix. Each adoption was celebrated with photos under the Luna's Refuge sign, tears of joy flowing freely. As the sun began to set and the last visitors departed, Nora stood beneath the carved wooden sign. Emily, Jake, and Rachel joined her, their faces tired but happy. Luna pressed against Nora's leg, her presence a reminder of where their journey had begun. "I can't believe we did it," Emily whispered, watching the last rays of sunlight glint off the sanctuary's windows. Jake squeezed Nora's shoulder. "You gave these animals a second chance," he said, "and the community a place to help make that happen." Rachel nodded, her eyes bright. 7 adoptions today alone, she added. 7 lives changed forever. Luna wagged her tail, looking up at Nora with trust in her eyes. The morning routine at Luna's Refuge had become a well-orchestrated dance. Nora moved from kennel to kennel, checking on each resident while volunteers filled water bowls and cleaned spaces. The autumn air carried the sound of happy barks and the rustle of fallen leaves. In the puppy area, Luna's offspring bounded around with typical teenage energy. Their lesions had long since healed, leaving them healthy and vibrant. One by one, families had fallen in love with these survivors. Today, the last of Luna's puppies would go home with a retired teacher who had plenty of love and time to share. "Another success story," Rachel said, helping Nora prepare the adoption paperwork. The sanctuary's donation box was full again. Food, blankets, and supplies from the community kept arriving steadily. The peaceful morning shifted suddenly when a sharp yelp followed by a cry echoed from the rehabilitation area. Nora rushed over to find Max, a recently rescued German Shepherd, backing away from Sarah, a new volunteer who clutched her bleeding hand. "Stay still," Nora commanded calmly, placing herself between Sarah and Max. The dog's eyes were wild with fear, his body rigid. Drawing from her military experience, Nora began speaking in low, soothing tones, while maintaining eye contact with Max. "It's my fault," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I reached into his kennel too quickly." Rachel appeared with a first aid kit, leading Sarah away for treatment while Nora continued working with Max. Slowly, his posture relaxed, though the fear in his eyes remained. Later that afternoon, Nora and Rachel sat in the office, discussing the incident. "We need a more structured program for cases like Max," Nora explained, sketching out ideas on a notepad. "Something that combines behavioral therapy with proper volunteer training." Rachel leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. "I could lead it," she offered. "My experience with rehabilitation techniques could really help." Together, they outlined a comprehensive program. Specialized training for volunteers, detailed behavioral assessments, and individualized rehabilitation plans for each traumatized dog. As evening approached, Nora settled at her computer, Luna dozing peacefully beside her desk. She updated the sanctuary's website, adding photos of Luna's last puppy with his new family and sharing stories of recent successes. The satisfaction of seeing so many lives transformed filled her heart. Luna stretched and pressed her head against Nora's leg, her presence a constant reminder of where this journey began. Through her, dozens of dogs had found new homes, and countless more would follow. Despite the day's challenges, the sanctuary was fulfilling its promise, one rescued soul at a time. The courthouse loomed before them, its stone facade stark against the morning sky. Nora and Jake walked up the steps together, their footsteps echoing in the crisp air. Inside the courtroom, the polished wooden benches filled quickly with supporters, volunteers, and media representatives. Victor sat at the defense table, his usual intimidating presence diminished by the standard court attire. He avoided eye contact with anyone, staring straight ahead as his lawyer shuffled papers beside him. The prosecution presented their case methodically. Photographs from the raid flashed across the screen. Images of emaciated dogs, filthy kennels, and fighting equipment. Each piece of evidence was accompanied by detailed documentation, veterinary reports, financial records, and witness statements. Jake squeezed Nora's arm gently as they watched their months of work unfold before the court. The prosecutor's voice remained steady as she described the conditions found at Victor's property, backed by Nora's careful documentation and medical assessments. When Emily took the stand, her hands trembled as she gripped the railing, but her voice grew stronger as she recounted Luna's rescue, describing the dog's condition and her desperate escape from Victor's property. She spoke of Luna's difficult pregnancy and the puppy's health issues, her testimony painting a clear picture of Victor's negligence and cruelty. Victor's defense attorney attempted to create doubt, suggesting the evidence had been mishandled during the raid. He tried to paint Emily as a thief who had stolen valuable breeding stock. But under cross-examination, his arguments fell flat against the weight of evidence and testimony. Medical experts confirmed Nora's findings about the dog's conditions. Former employees of Victor's operation, granted immunity, described the horrific practices they had witnessed. Each testimony added another brick to the wall of evidence against him. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. When they filed back into the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Nora held her breath as the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts: animal cruelty, illegal dogfighting, criminal conspiracy. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the courtroom. Emily covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Jake placed a steadying hand on Nora's shoulder as they watched Victor being led away in handcuffs, his facade of power finally shattered. Back at the sanctuary, the evening air buzzed with joy and relief. Nora had arranged a small celebration in the visitor center, where tables groaned under the weight of potluck dishes brought by volunteers and supporters. Emily arranged flowers in mason jars, while Rachel helped set out paper plates and utensils. Jake arrived with a cake decorated with paw prints and the words "Justice Served." The room filled with laughter and chatter as people gathered, sharing hugs and congratulations. Luna's puppies, now grown and living with their adoptive families, had even come for a visit with their new owners. "Remember that first night?" Emily asked softly, standing next to Nora. "When Luna was in labor? I was so scared." Nora nodded, watching Luna play with her puppies on the floor. "You were brave to come to me for help. Look at what it started." Rachel joined them, holding up her phone to show recent photos of their latest rehabilitation success. A formerly aggressive dog now gentle enough to work with children. "We've helped so many since then," she said, her eyes bright with pride. Jake raised his glass in a toast. "To Luna's refuge," he announced, "and to the team that made it possible." After the celebrations wound down, Nora took a solitary walk through the sanctuary grounds. The setting sun painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks, casting long shadows across the well-maintained paths. Luna trotted faithfully beside her, occasionally bumping against her leg affectionately. In the main play yard, several dogs romped together, their barks full of joy rather than fear. Nora paused to watch them, remembering how many had arrived, trembling, aggressive, or shut down from trauma. Now they bounded across the grass, tails wagging, bodies strong and healthy. She passed the rehabilitation area, where the newest arrivals were learning to trust again. Through the fence, she saw Rachel working patiently with a timid shepherd mix, using the gentle techniques they'd developed together. The medical facility, once just a converted barn, now stood as a fully equipped veterinary center. Through the window, she could see Emily preparing medications for the evening rounds, moving with confidence that had grown over the months. Finally, Nora stopped beneath the carved wooden sign, reading Luna's Refuge. The letters glowed golden in the last rays of sunlight. Luna sat beside her, alert and content, so different from the scared, pregnant dog Emily had rescued. Looking up at the first stars appearing in the clear sky, Nora felt overwhelming gratitude wash over her. She whispered a quiet thank you to the universe, for the team that had become family, for the animals who taught her to heal, and for the second chance that had transformed her life in ways she never expected. The sanctuary grounds bloomed with colorful banners and balloons, marking its one-year anniversary celebration. Children laughed as they played with puppies in the supervised meet and greet area, while former adopters shared success stories with prospective pet parents. The visitor center bustled with activity as volunteers handed out commemorative T-shirts and informational packets. Nora watched the scene from the makeshift stage, her heart full. The turnout had exceeded their expectations, with cars lining the country road leading to Luna's refuge. She spotted familiar faces in the crowd, families who had adopted their first pets here, local business owners who had supported their mission, and fellow veterans who had found purpose volunteering with the rehabilitation program. Standing at the podium, Nora cleared her throat and began her speech. When we opened our doors 1 year ago, we had a simple mission, to provide safety and healing for animals in need. Today, I'm proud to announce we're expanding that mission. The crowd listened intently as she outlined their new initiatives. The Behavior Rehabilitation Program would now include specialized training for dealing with severe trauma cases. Local schools had signed up for their educational program, where children would learn about responsible pet ownership and animal welfare. And none of this would have been possible, Nora continued, her voice softening, without one very special dog. She gestured to Luna, who sat regally beside her. Luna's tail wagged as the crowd applauded, her bright eyes scanning the familiar faces. She had come so far from the frightened, pregnant dog who had started it all. As the afternoon activities wound down and the golden light of sunset painted the sanctuary in warm hues, Nora made her way to the highest hill on the property. The spot offered a perfect view of the entire sanctuary, the sprawling play yards, the rehabilitation center, and the medical facility that had helped so many animals heal. Emily appeared beside her, offering a cup of hot tea. Jake joined them moments later, his usual clipboard absent for once. Luna settled at Nora's feet, content and peaceful. The three friends stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. "Remember when this was just an empty field?" Emily mused, gesturing at the bustling sanctuary below. Jake chuckled. "With one very determined former military vet and a pregnant German shepherd." Nora smiled, feeling the warmth of memories wash over her. Each building, each fence post, each healing animal represented a step in their shared journey. The sanctuary had grown beyond her wildest dreams, becoming not just a safe haven for animals, but a place of healing for people too. Luna pressed against her leg, offering her steady, grounding presence. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, a fitting end to their anniversary celebration. Standing there with Emily and Jake, watching over the sanctuary they'd built together, Nora felt completely at peace. She had finally found her place in the world. If you enjoyed the story of Nora and Luna, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.